Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned for our last video of the year. Yes, today we are signing off from 2023. Stupid, dumb year we just lived through. We lived through it though, Roger. Of course, the sad part is that 2024 doesn't look like it's going to be any better. In fact, it might even be worse. But at least we've got books. At least we've got books. We still have those. Occasionally, I even have time to read them. So there's that. And what is today? Today is Saturday, right? It is. So today, I'm kind of doing an early weekend reading report. I'm going to talk about all the books that I finished this past week, the last books of 2023. I actually started a book that I should be able to finish this weekend, and it will be the last book I read of 2023. So let's just do that. Let's just do that, Roger. The last books that I read in 2023 and some of the final books that showed up here at the Manor. I did get a few things, and then we'll talk about, the future, the stupid future. We'll do that. So, what were these final books that I read this year? Okay, I did finish this book, which was a lot of fun. This is Swordsman in the Sky by Donald Wollheim, and this was a collection of a bunch of sword and planet stories that were inspired by the Mars series, basically, from Edgar Rice Burroughs. All the science fiction interplanetary adventure stories of Edgar Rice Burroughs, which were a big deal back in the 60s. Edgar Rice Burroughs had a pretty big revival in the 1960s, and Ace started publishing him, and other companies started publishing him, and he was like a big deal again, which he should have been, because Edgar Rice Burroughs is a lot of fun. And this book was actually a lot of fun. None of these stories were as good as Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, but they were pretty good. And one of them was really good. So let's talk about the contents real quick. So this came out in 1964. The first story was Swordsman of Lost Terra by Paul Anderson, and that was good. That was a good story, a good, solid science fiction, fantasy, adventure story. Mostly, it felt more like it was more of a fantasy, actually, than a science fiction story. I mean, technically it was science fiction, but it felt more like a fantasy, as most of these kinds of stories do. And then we had People of the Crater by Andre Norton, which was not very good. In fact, I would go so far as to say People of the Crater was bad. It was bad. It had a kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs-y plot, but it was not great. It was not great. Then we have The Moon That Vanished by Leigh Brackett, and that was good. Leigh Brackett usually does not disappoint. In fact, I can't remember reading a bad Leigh Brackett story. I'm sure they must exist, but I'm not sure I've read one. Leigh Brackett's pretty good, and this was a good story. The Moon That Vanished. Not Leigh Brackett's best story, but it was a good story. Probably the best in this volume. Then we have A Vision of Venus by Otis Adelbert Klein, which was just a few pages long. And it wasn't a great few pages, but it was only a few pages. So, Otis Adelbert Klein, you never really know. Well, you know what you're going to get. It's pulpy nonsense. But you don't know if it's going to be fun pulpy nonsense or just kind of crappy pulpy nonsense. And in this case, it leaned towards the crappy. But there wasn't much of it. It was small. It was short. So, A Vision of Venus, not much of a vision, I think. But then we had Kaldar, World of Antares by Edmund Hamilton. And that was a lot of fun. Edmund Hamilton is usually a lot of fun, even when he's, extra pulpy, which he was in this story. He wrote a story with a very Edgar Rice Burroughs plot and a breakneck pace. A little too much, because it read like it sort of read at times like an outline of a novel. Everything just moved so fast. it could have been, he could have fleshed this out a bit and made it a decent, Edgar Rice Burroughs pastiche. And as a short story, it just rockets along so quickly. It just doesn't always really work, but it's fun. It's fun. So that was that. Swordsman in the Sky, edited by Donald A. Walheim. That was fun, with a great Frank Frazetta cover. So I read that, and then I read this book, which was given to me by Steve Donoghue when I visited Steve Donoghue this year. That was the high point of the year, visiting Steve. And he gave me this book by Maurizio Di Giovanni, I Will Have Vengeance. I Will Have Vengeance. And this is The Winter of Commisero. I can't even speak. How do you pronounce Commisero? I don't. It's this word. It's this word. I don't speak Italian or even English that well, so I can't pronounce anything. I can't even pronounce his name. Ricciardi? Ricciardi? I don't know. It's Italian. I should have asked the lady of the manor. She's Italian. And every time I try to say Italian words, she gets really annoyed with me because I can't pronounce anything. Oh well. I Will Have Vengeance. This was a mystery story. And our main character, the very dour and gloomy Ricciardi, let's call him Ricciardi. The very dour and gloomy Ricciardi is really good at solving crimes. And one thing that helps him out is that he can see dead people. He sees dead people, but he sees visions of them, but only at the end of their life. And they're always repeating their last words. Whatever their last words were, that's what they say. And these dead people, aside from making him miserable, provide him with clues to solve crimes. And it's actually an entertaining book. This is a good book. I really enjoyed it. I Will Have Vengeance. And it's, it's kind of, if you stretch the definition, it's kind of a occult detective book. I mean, it is a detective who uses supernatural abilities to help him solve crimes. So, I was going to read this for Occult Detective October. That was in October, wasn't it? Ah, man, I can't remember anything. I was going to read it for that, but I didn't because I read other stuff. But I'm glad I read it this week because it was cool. So I read this. And then that was going to be the last thing I read, only I have a few days left. And I picked up this book I didn't intend to read, but now I'm reading it. This is Stephen King's The Eyes of the Dragon. And I'm not that far in it, but it's a short book. And I should have time in the next couple days to finish it, actually. The Eyes of the Dragon by Stephen King. So this is my last book of 2023. I am reading, slowly, every book written by Stephen King in the order that they were published. And this is the book that I'm up to because I'm in the 1980s. When was this published? 1987? Is that what it says? I don't have my glasses on, so everything is a blur. And it's also, 4:20 in the morning, so it would be a blur anyway. So yeah, Stephen King, The Eyes of the Dragon, reading this right now. Surprisingly to me, it's actually pretty good. It seemed like a dopey YA thing Stephen King wrote. Have to read it, so I'll read it. But no, it's actually entertaining. And I'm enjoying it. I just started it, but I'm enjoying it. So I want to know what happens in this story. I mean, I have a strong suspicion of what's going to happen in this story, but I want to see how it turns out. Flag, Stephen King's villain Flag from other books, most notably The Stand, is in this book, or at least a version of him is in this book. Stand did not impress. Flag did not impress me in The Stand. He just seemed like a ridiculous comic book villain stuffed into that book. But in this book, he actually works. He's actually much creepier in this one. So that's good. So that's what I read. I did get a few things. And so these are the last few books that arrived at the Manor this year. One I received from a viewer in the mail. This is from a viewer. This is And the Devil Will Drag You Under by Jack L. Chalker. This is an author I've never read, which surprises me because if I'm remembering right, my mother read this guy's books. And I used to see these books around the house, Chalker books. But I never read any of them, and I'm not exactly sure why. And then I'd never hear about this author talked about on BookTube ever. I don't know that I've ever heard Jack Chalker talked about on BookTube. But I'm going to read this book because it was sent to me. It's The Devil Will Drag You Under, and then I'll talk about Jack L. Chalker. And what is this book about? The end of the world was coming, and only a drunken demon could save it. Only a drunken demon. Only a drunken demon can save the world. That could be true. We're screwed because in real life there are no drunken demons around to help us out. But apparently there's one in this book. The Devil Will Drag You Under. So there you go. Thank you for sending this book to me, friendly viewer. And The Devil Will Drag You Under. There you go. And then up the street from Stately Vaughan Manor, there is a house with a little free library that I almost never get anything from because all the books are books I would never read ever. Usually, but every once in a while there's a book that's cool. And I did find a book at this little free library, and that's this book. This is The Secret History of Wonder Woman by Jill Lepore. Jill Lepore wrote this book, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, and it looks really good. I don't know if it's really good because I haven't read it, but it looks to be a really good book. So here it is. It's The Secret History of Wonder Woman by Jill Lepore. I hope to read it sometime in 2024, and I'll tell you about The Secret History. So there you go. I did get a Marvel Epic Collection that I pre-ordered a while ago. I think I ordered this a while ago. This is the X-Men. This is the Brood Saga. The Brood Saga. So this will go amongst my gigantic collection of Epic Collections. So this contains the X-Men stories that were published in 1982 to 1983. So this is when the X-Men were big. I mean, they were big for a long time, but they kind of became really big in the 80s and really popular. And this is from that time when Chris Claremont was writing the book. So yeah, it looks to be really cool. It's been forever since I've read any of these stories. I don't know that I've read any of these stories since the 1980s, so it's been a while. So that was cool. It was cool to see that show up. And so that's it. And so the year done with the year. And in January, or maybe even, a few hours before January, I will be starting this book. Well, this is 10 books, actually. It's 10 books. It's the Great Book of Amber, which has the complete Amber Chronicles, Volume 1 to 10. Grammaticus, the great Grammaticus, talked me into reading this book. So I'm going to read the entire Chronicles of Amber. And that should be fun. That should be fun. Somehow I've gone my whole dumb life without reading this book. So I'm going to read that. And that's it. That's everything. That's everything for the rest of this year. And now this year is going to be over, and we can move on to 2024. Hopefully we'll live through it. Hopefully. I'm hoping. You never know. And so yeah, I will catch you next year. Thank you for hanging out with me here at the Manor. This channel has been a pleasant escape for me. And yeah, thanks guys. I will catch you next year.